I see people are starting to file in. The top of the hour has come.
They are. And what I am going to do is I will formally welcome everybody. Warren Jika, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'd really like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia. As I just mentioned, I'm joining this webinar from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also personally really like to recognise the continuing connection to lands, waters and the communities of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. What I'd also like to do is introduce myself briefly, because I think a lot of you on this call may not know me. My name's Ellie McSheedy, and I'm the Research Manager for Eastern Health Clinical School, which is part of the Faculty of Medicine. In this context, I'm here to represent two of the directorates of the school, and that is Turning Point and Monash Addiction Research Centre. I'm going to give you a very, very quick overview, and you've got this busy slide to look at, of what those directorates are about. So Turning Point is a national addiction treatment centre dedicated to providing high quality evidence-based treatments to people adversely affected by alcohol, drugs and gambling. They integrate this clinical treatment with world-leading research and education, and take in highly translational research to explore, examine and evaluate addiction-related harms to generate solutions that transform policy, practice and, really importantly, community attitudes. The Monash Addiction Research Centre, or MARC, is based in the Peninsula campus of Monash University. It's a virtual centre that brings together world-leading expertise across Monash to address the harms done by alcohol, drugs and gambling and the related health and social problems. MARC's mission is to provide national thought leadership, education and research excellence to develop, deliver and evaluate effective policy and practice approaches to addiction. So after giving that overview of those two directorates, we're really excited for you all to join us. It's fabulous, the volume of people who've registered and turned up for this. So there's obviously a strong appetite in Monash to learn more about impact creation and the pathways. It is a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Wade Kelly, the Director of Research Excellence and Impact at Monash University. Wade doesn't know this, but I have been stalking him a little bit for the last 6 months because I have been really excited to have him come speak to our cohort, because, you know, Wade is an internationally known for his research engagement and impact work. He's also a very entertaining, informative speaker. So I think we're in for a great session. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Wade and let me stop sharing.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Ellie. Nothing quite like an introduction like that to really set me up for failure. I want to thank you so much for coming today and spending your lunch hour with me. I hope wherever you're from, wherever you're joining me from, the weather is nice and your room is warm. I'm going to just share a PowerPoint and we're going to get started here. Before we do get started, we've already done an acknowledgement of country, but I'd like to do another one. I'm Canadian, and I want to acknowledge the people of the Denizzi people from where I grew up in northern Canada, northern British Columbia, the people of the Doig, Halfway and Blueberry River First Nations. And I've been doing this lately in presentations because I've been thinking a lot about my home, land and waters and air, particularly the air and the land, because there's just horrific wildfires that are plaguing the country. And so I'm thinking about that a lot, and no better time. It's never more present in your mind than when something bad happens. So thinking about that and paying my respects to elders past and present, and anybody in the room who's of First Nations ancestry. All right, let's get going on this journey of impact. In the chat, if you could pop into the chat and just tell me what brought you here. What are you hoping to get out of today's session? What's something that's on your mind that you'd like clarified? Hopefully I can provide some of that. So I'll give you a couple seconds and just pop it in the chat. And Ellie, we've got an hour, that's correct, right?
Yeah, that's correct, an hour.
Oh, thanks, Alicia. I noticed several names here all of a sudden. Okay. Doing impact, looking for ideas. Ideas, okay, I can do ideas. Articulating impact better, okay, yeah. Where to start? Okay, Lorene, lots of familiar names here. Support impact planning, okay. Not sure how far we'll go down that rabbit hole, but hopefully it'll give you some ideas. Oh, Squamish Nation, lovely. That's a gorgeous area. Okay. All right, so I'll hit on some of these things. I probably won't get to all of them, but hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion at the end, and I'll make sure we leave some time and we can start exploring some of these issues. The next thing I'd like you to do in the chat is just on a scale of 1 to 10, rate your impact literacy. So I know where you're coming from. So I'm going to be really bold and say that I'm a 10. I wrote a book on impact, so I feel like that's the qualification that gives you somewhere in the 9.5 to 10 range. Where are you at? And there's no judgment here. If you're at a 2, that's fine. Even a 1. Okay. Keep coming. Okay. So my quick sampling is we're in the lower lower half of the impact literacy spectrum. So that's okay. The second or the final question I was hoping that you could answer, and I know that there's professional and academic staff in the room here. I'm wondering if you could tell me the problem that's at the core of your research. So again, I'll shut up, attend to the introverts in the room, and take a couple seconds to type in the core problem that your research is looking to solve. Oh, there they all started going like crazy. Okay. Oh, great. Thanks for joining us from Marketing and Comms. That's wonderful to see you here. Measuring and articulation. Yeah, I won't talk about this a lot. I do want to kind of just get a bit picky about the word measure. A lot of people invite me to do presentations and they say, can you teach us how to measure impact? And I said, no, I can't do that because it's not a measurement. Often it's not. And I like that you said articulate, because that's often what it is. It is telling a narrative. It's telling a story, and it's using various types of evidence along the way to be able to demonstrate that you've generated an impact in some way, space, form. And generally, good impact case studies draw on both qualitative and quantitative types of evidence. The other issue with the word measure is, to me, measure suggests an endpoint, that we started here and now we're here. But actually, impact will continue to grow beyond when you're told the story, hopefully. And so that's getting a bit picky. It also, I think, it really benefits people in STEM sectors more so than HASP ones, and problematizing language is useful. All right, I'm going to tell you, because we said that we would use real life examples of impact, I thought I would start with one that you're all familiar with, but you might not have known that you were familiar with it. And that's this diagram right here. This diagram is the ARPA network. There's 4 nodes. One's in Utah, one's in UCLA, one's in University of California, Berkeley, I think, SRI. Does anyone know what this node is, what the ARPA network is in 1969? Well, it's the height of the Cold War. Sputnik's been launched, and the Americans realized that they need a way to transmit data between sites just to back things up. If there's a nuclear explosion, if there's an attack, they need to be able to have redundancy and backup. So they create this, and it's the first kind of computer network. You'll see where I'm going with this. Within a few years, within 4 years, this is what the network looks like. All these mainframes have been connected. By the way, this was based on research that started in 1963 about packet switching, with a paper that was basically theoretically packet switching would be a way to connect computers together and have them share information. So that's 1973. This is 1976. This is the Queen sending an email. So at this point, email, they didn't call it email until 1982, but she effectively sent an email, one of the first people to send an email. 1977, this is what ARPANET now looks like. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You can see here those 4 nodes originally in 69, 70, 72, 77. And then, you know, the 80s roll around and you move from it being kind of an academic exercise to one that was used in government, to one that corporations started to realize it'd be really useful for these massive corporations to be able to share information between sites as well. And so corporate use of this technology, packet switching technology, starts to take hold. And then in 1991, this guy, Tim Berners-Lee, comes around and he uses a Next computer to figure out a graphic user interface, and he calls it the World Wide Web. And then this is a very modern photo. This is from a couple of years ago of all the major kind of like through ports that major internet traffic goes through. It's now, of course, as you know, you've probably figured it out a little while ago. I'm talking about the internet, and the internet is ubiquitous and it's everywhere, and it's now on our phones and in our pockets. And I'm connecting with you through the technology that was developed starting in 1963. And so the research impact can take a long time. In health, we often quote that it's about 17 years from research to adoption. In education, 35 years. So a lot of my job is to think, how can we speed that up? How can we take knowledge and get it implemented into practice quicker for the benefit of the communities that we work with? And so that's really that's the when I wake up in the morning, this is the thing that occupies my mind. How can we make that translation process happen quicker? And I'm talking to a room full of people here, and I'm looking at the chat, who have very applied research and really lofty goals. And you guys do great work, and I'm very excited by it. So how can we amplify that research and make it happen quicker? I'm going to talk a little bit about now, hopefully that was a useful real life case study, because Ellie put that in the description, so I figured I'd better put one together. It's salient. We all use it. It took a very long time to move from scholarly to sectoral to societal impact, and that's where we're at. I used to use this model to talk about how it starts with excellent research, and then we do strategic engagement, and then we have an impact with, we work with partners to generate an impact. And increasingly funders are actually thinking of this, that really excellent research includes strategic engagement with key partners to generate an impact in various different realms. It can be in health, it can be culture, practice, sustainability, economy, curriculum, etc. One thing I need to make really clear, commercialization is one potential type of impact. It is not the only type of impact. And it's an important type of impact, but it's not a synonym. Impact is not a synonym for commercialization. Impact is lots of things. And at the kind of core of this is like, why do we exist as a university? You know, what should we be doing? What do we owe society? What do we owe taxpayers? And I think that that conversation is a very broad one. One of the things we do is we train and educate the next generation. And if anybody's been paying attention, there was the Minister for Education, Minister Clare, had a speech yesterday at the press club, and he talked a lot about the importance of education and lifelong learning. So big focus on that. There wasn't a ton of focus on research. So we're hoping that when the final report comes out later in the year in December, it's called the University Accord, that there'll be more focus on research. And research funding. But they did mention actually that they're hoping that they'd like to move to where research is fully funded by agencies like the ARC, MRFF, and NHMRC. And to me, what fully funded means not just getting the paper out. It means translating the knowledge for the user groups that you work with. And a lot of you are expert in that already. And the rest of the university could be learning from you. At Monash, it was created in 1958 to benefit the community as required by the necessities of the age. And so that's built right into the fabric of the way that Monash operates. And if you look at our institutional plan, which is called Impact 2030, the three key global challenges are climate change, geopolitical security, and thriving communities. And an area like yours is not going to have difficulty aligning with those priorities, because they really are the challenges of the age. Now, there are some specific definitions. The Australian Research Council calls research impact the contribution that research makes to the economy, society, environment, or culture beyond the contribution to academic research. And the word beyond is really important there. We're not talking about scholarly research. We're not talking about H-index. We're not talking about citation chaining. We're not talking about you working with your colleagues internationally in other universities. We're talking about how people in the world outside of the walls of the university adapt, adopt, and use your beautiful knowledge and research. The NHMRC has a slightly different definition. They include knowledge impact. And so if anybody has applied for an NHMRC, you might have chose to argue that your research will have a knowledge impact. And that means that the next user might be another scientist. This is particularly applicable in bench and fundamental sciences. What I really want to stress, though, is that the definition is, there's no one definition for research impact in the same way as that there's no one definition for research. There's going to be different definitions applied in different contexts. What's important is you find out what they're asking for whoever you're applying from. So if you're applying for Horizon funding in the UK, that's another definition. If you're applying for National Science Foundation funding in the States, that's another definition. If you're applying in Canada through the Tri-Council, then you're going to be talking about knowledge mobilization rather than impact, but a lot of the language is the same. Hopefully you can't hear that saw in the background. I hope that it's somebody cutting wood or something productive and it's not a murder scene. All right. My take home, hopefully, is that impact is change in the world. And you guys do that brilliantly. And I was just going on the website earlier today looking at some of your research, and there's so much good stuff coming out. And as you can see in the chat, a huge range. So it is not just about funding. It's not just about complying with some kind of national assessment. You see lots and lots of different drivers around impact, and a lot are related to that key question of why do we do the work that we do? Why do we exist? Why do taxpayers pay money to fund universities? And then the impact results, they're going to be different for different stakeholders within the chain. So for academics, for your administrators, for community, for the government, there's different reasons. But hopefully for you, and it sounds like looking at some of the discussion in the chat, it really is about making lives better. And what a great thing that is. So like I said, with the Tim Berners-Lee example, that move goes from scholarly impact to sectoral to societal impact. But actually, I think it's a lot more complex than that. It might look like that, or maybe even like that. The problem with this model is we haven't thought about we're thinking about the end point, the destination as impact. But actually that journey, that moving from scholarly impact to sectoral impact is because of engagement work. And that's the thing that's really critical in terms of getting impact generated through your research, is all the engagements. And some of those things, you know, you've been trained from day one when you started your PhD in how to do engagement work. Some of those skills you might not have. So going back to the person in marketing comms, there's a suite of knowledge and skills that people in that area will have that may be complementary to the goals that you have for mobilizing your research. I'm going to stop for a second there because I just went through a whole lot. Are there any questions at this point? And you can just grab the mic if you'd like. I put you all on the spot. All right, keep on thinking of your questions. You can put them in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on that, or you can grab the microphone a little bit later. I'd love to hear from you. Now, the conversation around impact is evolving, and I think that this is where my mind is 5 years in the future around impact. I'm not looking at what's going on in the sector. I'm looking at what is happening to the sector and what is going to be changing. And what we're going to be seeing increasingly is a move towards responsible research partnerships, responsible research approaches, thinking about ethical partnerships and really making that clear to funders, really engaging in deep, meaningful engagement processes. I've been an external on several grants, looking at the impact portion of the grant. And if you can't convince me that you've meaningfully engaged with a user group, a stakeholder, a next user, an end user, a client, a customer, a patient, it's not going to get rated well. And the increasing value of lived experience is another kind of element in that below the iceberg kind of metaphor. Again, that looking to the next 5 years, often when I talk to researchers, they say, I think I already do good work, and I just need to learn how to do a better impact statement. I just need to know how to do a better impact narrative. And it's either the retrospective story of what you've done, or it's the perspective, what you think the research will do to generate change. And I argue that we're actually looking at a lot more. It's not just the icing on the cake. Funders want to know, where are the ingredients from? How were they sourced? Are they ethically sourced? Who made the cake? Who was involved in making the cake? Does the person that you've made the cake for actually like cake? Maybe they like pie. Are we actually delivering them something that they wanted? And so we can continue this kind of metaphorical journey of impact. I think it's a really useful endpoint, thinking about the icing on the cake. It has to have good icing. It's got to look good, but actually the stuff that makes up the cake is increasingly important. So a good impact statement is not going to be enough. Thinking about meaningful engagement. What does it mean to ensure that we've engaged in a meaningful way? I really like this one because this is the picture of the kids' table, right? And I mean, maybe you've been invited to some event like this where you realize that actually you've got no power, because you might be at the conference, but actually all the really important decisions are being made in small rooms at the lunch hour that are invite only. And so how are we again, I'm guessing that you guys do a multitude of meaningful engagement work, and maybe other parts of the university could be learning from your approaches to this. But being able to articulate that you've got the right people in the room or at the table, that the table's been set appropriately, is important for funders. Thinking about our strategic partnerships, and thinking about how we ensure that we're delivering outputs to the partners that are appropriate. And often I find that people haven't gotten to that stage. They go, we hope to find through this research, we'll answer these key questions. Great. Once the questions are answered, though, how are you going to share that information, right? How are you going to use that information to increase community awareness of STIs? How are you going to use that information to communicate the value of pathways of care for people who use alcohol and other drugs, looking at the chat here? How are you going to use that information to improve addiction treatment? What does the actual mobilization look like to partners? How are you going to translate that research, that phase between when you've got good research knowledge and outcomes? And my example of this one is, my friend is Colombian. He went back to Colombia over Christmas, and he brought an Ottolenghi recipe book, because he thought, he really loves the recipe book, and he was going to cook his family all these delicious meals. And then, I don't know if you've cooked from the Ottolenghi cookbook, but like every recipe requires lemons, and in Colombia there's no lemons, it's all limes. And so there was a translational issue there, that you could have the recipe, but if the ingredients don't exist, you can't do the thing. And so really thinking about, what does that translation look like? If it's for teen addiction, as an example, is a pamphlet the best translation approach? or maybe, go where the teens are. Maybe they're on TikTok, and that's a more appropriate intervention. And then finally, how has knowledge mobilized, and making sure that you're sharing your research with the world, and what are the kind of ethics that underpin those relationships, to ensure that if you're working with marginalized groups, that there's not a power differential. So these are some of the kind of big, I'll stop for a second again, some of the kind of big issues at play in the impact space. And I think that these metaphors are a really interesting way to get in to think about those. Does anybody have any thoughts on that or any questions?
I'm going to chime in with a quick question, Wade, if that's okay.
Please.
You're saying you're sort of really looking ahead, that sort of 5, possibly 10 years, and at the moment, consumer involvement, lived experience, however we kind of frame that, is a requirement that's becoming more and more prominent with funding bodies.
Yeah.
I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball. Where do you predict that going? Have you got sort of any thoughts about that?
We're already seeing it with a lot of funders, but I suspect that people are going to get better at doing it and more savvy. And I suspect as well that there might be some mechanisms when you're talking about reporting to ensure that you've actually done it. So the ARC has talked about impact reporting, for example, floated the idea that they would like to, you get the grant and then they would like to know that you actually did the things you said you were going to do. Other funding agencies internationally have started doing that. And so I know researchers at another university who have told me point blank, oh, we just need to say, you got to put the word co-design in there. You need to put co-produce in there. You don't actually have to do that, but if that's in the grant, you'll get the grant and then you're fine. Well, maybe now in some cases, sure. But I think increasingly that's going to go away. That responsible research underpinning the research environment question is increasingly prominent in discussions around higher education policy. So I can look to the research excellence framework that is going to happen in 2028 in the UK, and the increased focus on research environment is already been told. We've already been told that that's happening. So yeah, some of these things we know are happening. The other thing is that, I'm talking about gazing into my crystal ball for your purposes, because I think that it's still early days in lots of ways, and you can help shape that conversation. In 2016, there was a white paper that was released around an impact pilot that the Australian government was going to do. And the word commercialization was in there 22 times, and the word qualitative was in there once. And the social sciences and humanities scholars didn't love that, and they put a lot of pressure on the government. And the actual pilot, once it ran, it took a very different form. And so part of my argument is that we can't turn off, impact. Even if you think it's a fad, I don't see it going away anytime soon. And so figuring out how to respond to that within the context of your research is probably a prudent thing to do. Alrighty. So this is we talked about in the description of this session, a pathway to impact. And this is the traditional kind of result chain framework that's often been talked about. So you have your inputs. What do you need to do to undertake the research? And what are you going to do during the research process? That's your activities. Because you've done research, you've got some outputs. That could be academic papers. It could be those pamphlets, the TikTok video. It could be any number of things, clinical guidelines. The outcomes is then what are the short or medium term results because of that? Clinical guidelines a good example. The output is the clinical guideline. The outcome is having that adopted into use within some kind of context. But the actual impact is because the clinical guideline around knee injuries and using ice, I'm just making things up, to increase the speed of recovery. Because physiotherapists started doing that, you've seen 1/3 reduction in the amount of time it takes for patients to recover from some injury. Well, that's the impact. So this is the traditional kind of model that we've been using for decades, basically, around theory of change, how things get implemented and generate impact. But I actually have been working with a colleague in in MODA, Lisa Grocott, sorry. Lisa Given's my PhD supervisor. Lisa Grocott, who we've been talking about, it's not actually that simple, it's much more complex. And so thinking about how do you co-create research, changing the starting point, changing the kind of questions that are asked and the prompts that you've got along the way. What are the activities and the outputs? Who are the next users? I like the word next user rather than stakeholder or end user, because you don't always know who your end user will be, but you can usually identify who's the person you're going to work with. What the key kind of group, the stakeholder that's going to be most interested immediately from your work. What are the outcomes and again, the impacts? But actually, it's probably more complex than that. It's layered. It's not linear. It's not cyclical. It's all over the map. And so I'm trying to get my mind around it, and hopefully it's useful for researchers to think about this, because this is a very linear process, but it doesn't always follow this pathway. Often you get to the research outcomes and go, oh, we need to go back to start. We've got some good results, but now we've got to go back to that co-creating research because we have enough information to get to the next stage of the research. And maybe that makes that the impact is going to take longer, but that's just how it's necessary. So yes, complexifying this, I will share all these slides out. Very happy to do that. So that early stage around context, how are you co-creating research goals to that's relevant to the context? So starting listening and learning from people with expertise different from your own. How are you co-constructing positive change with partners? What does that look like to respectfully engage with government, NGO, industry, sector, community, partners, patients, whatever it might be? How do you account for power differentials? I was chatting with someone earlier this week and they were talking about how, because we're Monash, there's a certain, they have difficulty because the community group that they were working with just wants the answers. You should have the answers, you're the university. And so there's a lot of work being done with that group around building understanding that the relationship is going to be reciprocal. So I won't go through all of this, but I just kind of wanted to use it as a way to kind of expand our thinking. I mentioned the REF earlier. The REF is the Research Evaluation Framework. And in 2014, it ran for the first time. And when it ran, there was 6,637 case studies. And when they did the assessment, the analysis later on, which is the link is on the bottom, they found that there were 3,709 unique pathways to impact, which is going back to this one here, is that there's no, it's not this, it's not this, it's going to be a lot messier, and that's okay. But every project, every researcher is going to have a different journey on this. And a lot of you have already generated impact through your research, of course. The question is then, how do you continue to amplify that? And what skills do you need? What will that look like? I'm going to talk about impact culture in a second. I'll stop there. I only have a few more slides in this kind of behemoth presentation. I wanted to make sure we had lots of time for questions. So I'm going to answer Mandy's right now. Just a question we have at the moment: is there a benchmark for impact articulation? I.e., if we were to have a standard way in which we could articulate our impact across our major research project. Let's say, like the ones around climate change and thriving communities, is there a standard way we should aim to articulate the broader impact? No, there's no set way of doing this. This is a conversation, and I've worked with different units and groups in my career to think about what is success look like for that group, and then backward map what impact goals, what impact would look like, and then how you would articulate that. And it's a whole mapping process that you can go through. I can share some slides with you or potential use cases, but it's going to be different for every group and different for each approach. So when I was at La Trobe University, I worked with a majority of the research centers to actually think of this very question. How are we going to tell our story? How are we going to articulate our impact? And it's going to be very different in history and linguistics than it is going to be for dance, theater performance, microbiology, and fire ecology. So there's no one set answer, but it starts with you articulating what your values are, and ideally what your community that you're working with, what their values are. What does impact look like to them? What do they want to see? How will you know when you've got there? What is the kind of evidence that you need to make the argument that you've helped move the marker in that space? Mandy, does that help answer the question at all?
Yes, somewhat. Thank you. It's just something that I guess we've been grappling with at UMAC for a while, because a lot of the times we're tasked with promoting our research projects.
Yeah.
And it'd be great if we could come out and say, this is the impact, but we actually don't have that yet. So it's a work in progress, I guess, working with the research teams to find the best way to do it.
Well, and circle back and touch base with me. I'd love to continue that conversation. I think one of the things, and Rebecca Brown, the DVCR, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, is really keen for us to make sure that we're not just telling the research from the researcher perspective, that we want to make sure that we've got community, whoever that was or is, whoever's affected by the work, has got a voice in that space. And I think that was one of the challenges from the ref, as an example. It's the researcher reporting on the brilliant things that they've done and the change that they've made. But from a funding perspective and from a hand on heart perspective, hearing from the person who's benefited from a medical intervention or from a social program or whatever it might be is a lot more compelling. So
absolutely, yeah. And also perhaps finding a way to connect with even the students to say, look at all these, look at how you could potentially benefit the world. This is how we have been doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes that story gets lost. I was once had a kind of impact consultation coaching session with an academic, and we had talked for like an hour, and it was a really good conversation. He wanted to do this, he wanted to do that. He's got these ideas around blah, blah, blah. And then I'm walking out the door and I'm about to close his office door, and he says, "Oh, one more thing, I guess, just this thought of this. If I helped create a law, like a federal law for Australia, would that be impact?" And I'm like, "Yeah, for sure." And he's like, "Oh, because I've done that." And he hadn't, I was like, "What?" So I sat back down and we had that conversation, because it wasn't even front of mind. Like, it was just such a normal part of, like, well, of course it helped create this conversion therapy law, and it was just part of his working, right? He wasn't even thinking about it as impact. It was just like, that's the job he wanted to do. But it was I said, "How would you evidence that?" And he said, "Well, I've got, I'm directly quoted in ministerial briefings and in the Hansard." And I go, okay, like there's a story there. So sometimes people don't even can't articulate. They want to tell you one impact story, but oftentimes there's more of an impact story there to be told, and that's where your job is, to help people pull that out. And non-disciplinary specialists are really handy in that process, because a lot of researchers can't articulate their problem, and that's why I started this session with asking what the problem is, because I find that researchers are very good at telling you what they did, and even their motivations for doing it, but actually flying up in the air in the hot air balloon and telling us, what does that landscape look like? So sorry to pick on you, Alicia, but community of awareness of STIs is not the problem. That's what you want to do. You want to improve community awareness of STIs, but why? Alicia, if you want to jump in, feel free. What's the problem?
Oh, gee, have put me on the spot. I guess so that they can take steps to protect themselves and others.
But why?
So that they're not catching STIs and being treated and too frequently, and developing antimicrobial resistance and contributing to those kind of problems. Yeah.
So the actual problem is, or one of the problems, I suppose, is that STIs are is there an increased rate of them? Is it for their future health? Is it because of antimicrobial resistance? I mean, maybe it's multiple things, but that landscape, and I'm sorry to pick on you. I know you were the first one to respond, so you were very good. But the articulation of the problem is something people really kind of struggle to do, in my experience.
Yeah, great.
So what's your endpoint? You know, and it would depend on if you're applying for funding or if you were talking with a research partner. But the problem is that maybe, I'm just making this up, is that there's an increased rate of STIs, or that STIs are affecting a certain population at a certain rate. Yeah, just trying to tangle apart what's the problem?
Yeah.
And that could be, it can be a hard.
They're definitely on the rise and not
it?
abating. Yeah.
Okay, and why is that?
Lots of reasons, but I think we have pockets of communities who are really aware of STIs, and then we have other communities who are just as risky in their, taking, or just as active, and not, and not aware. Yeah.
Okay.
Completely unaware of that they're exposing themselves,
Okay, yeah, that's something to think about. Awareness is always challenging. The problem when the problem is lack of awareness, because that's really what you're flip it rather than raise. You're wanting to increase awareness, but the problem is lack of awareness, and that's causing X, Y, or Z. So just kind of flipping it a bit. If anybody else wants to take a go, feel free. Is that helpful for Mandy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Faith.
Okay. So Emily Chan, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Supporting HE students with ADHD. Can you tell me what the actual problem is?
So at the moment, the problem is that students are feeling like they're not adequately supported at the university, and so the academic problems and the higher rates of dropouts and course failures, I guess.
Right. So the problem is that there's high rates of dropouts because students aren't feeling supported, particularly students that have ADHD. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So flipping it a little bit, that is, hopefully a bit more compelling. Jody just put in the chat reduce public health burden, but what's the actual problem? What does public health burden look like?
So the recent analysis done by the Australian ADHD Professionals Association, so they found there was a huge economic and social burden associated with having ADHD in adulthood that's not adequately treated or supported.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thanks for being willing to jump in for all of the people who have taken the mic so far. It's never easy when you got a room full of 50 people. So thanks for being bold and taking an opportunity. Hopefully that's a useful way of thinking about this. So the 5 elements that make up a research impact statement are the problem, the solution, so what did you do, who did you work with, what did you generate, and what is the impact. So going back to the knee injury example, it could be that the problem is that people take a long time to recover from knee surgery. So the solution is some intervention that the person has created. The end user is possibly physiotherapists. It could be that could be the next user. It could be accreditation boards at universities who have to adopt this into practice. It could be the actual patient. So the output might be clinical guidelines. It could be a website. It could be a training series. It could be a workshop series. It could be all kinds of different types of outputs. And then the impact, hopefully, is a reduction in the amount of time it takes to recover from that injury. Often the impact is the flip of the problem. and you've done a bunch of stuff in between, and they're just the opposite. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions from folk at this point? Only seeing a few screens. Yeah, the person who put your hand up, where's the words there? Tajwini, is that how you pronounce it?
Thanks, Wade, for responding to this question. Thanks for your presentation. And I was just reflecting on some of the forward projections you're doing in terms of how to construct impact. But I think in the meantime, there are two, if you like, paradoxical processes researchers and academics have to deal with. One is the fact that your performance is judged by matrix, which is around potentially around primarily around publishing, etc., the quality of the journal, impact, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But what we do know in terms of good engagement, that is essentially the participatory nature or the co-production and the buzzwords, co-design actually takes hours and hours of work, and 4 or 6 to 10, to at least 10 to 12 months to build solid relationships and bring people, because people also have very varied interests within the stakeholders, even though they have got the main primary objective, funding, etc. So, but then there is no matrix for having 20 meetings and only 2 actually being successful. So what happens in terms of how do then university systems actually fit this notion of what's called meaningful engagement actually means no matrix? And I think there is that paradox.
Yeah, it's definitely a paradox, and it's a very big question. I would say that we're grappling with that. I'd say that some universities are farther along than others, and some countries are farther along than others in that context. I went to a conference last week, and there was a Professor Anna Pauline, is an Indigenous scholar, who had a quote that was something like, it will take a long time to develop trust with the community, but once you've got it forever. And if you break it, you've broken it forever. And it's just really stuck with me and been resonating. I've been thinking about it a lot. To do research with many types of communities will take tremendous amounts of time to build that relationship. And as you progress through your career and you get to like a level E, you have more time to do interdisciplinary projects, and because there's less risk to your trajectory. So it's a bit of a hard one to think about. I will say that some faculties have changed their annual review processes. I know that several are meeting often with folks who are thinking about what that might look like. Places like the Faculty of Engineering have reduced the amount of academic output that they want over a 3-year period, because they want people to be doing more work in that case with industry partners. So hopefully, you will see some changes along the way. The flip side is that funders, because of the ways that they're looking for people to be pitching, you will conceivably have more success if you're able to articulate that you have done the meaningful engagement work. And certainly funding is part of that metric. I guess the last thing I would say on that question is that we do lots of things in academia that we don't get rewarded explicitly for. And so there's some decision making along the way about your values and motivations as a researcher. What drives you to do the work that you do? And hopefully there's some alignment there with the impact agenda. I think for I often say there's no one right way to be an academic, and I argue that the impact space opens up more opportunity for people who are often doing this kind of work already. I'll leave it at that. Any other questions? I've got about 10 minutes left. I've got a few more slides, but not much more. Alicia, do you want to expand on your comment in the chat a little bit?
Just that it's been my observation, having moved up from, the mental health space into, more of a, physical health space,
Yeah.
that, you know, this conversation seems to be only about, you know, securing, you know, that you have to do this, so that you're going to have to do this to secure funding. And yeah, it's just, it seems to me to be the stick rather than the carrot. You know, it's, for me, it's just, you know, how do I'm you know, making inroads, but trying to sort of sell this within our centre, in terms of, you know, this will, you will see the benefit of this if you do it, but, you know, you have to sort of start doing it to, you know, see how it will benefit your research. Yeah, but I guess it's harder to make that case when you're talking to people who are, you know, professor level, you know, seen as like, you know, the leaders in their field, you know,
Yeah, and
without having done it historically.
sure, and you know, the grounds of higher education are moving quickly under our feet. So people who have been very successful in previous paradigms will continue to be successful in that way, publishing Nature papers, and that's fine. I think the most interest we get for people in the kinds of stuff I offer are generally early career and early mid-career researchers who are seeing the trends and who are seeing that in order to do the things that they want to do, there's some new skill developments, new approaches, and new ways of thinking. But, you know, higher education is not static. You know, if you talk to an anthropologist now and 100 years ago, they are very different approaches to everything that they do in that discipline. And so there's this kind of, I mean, we're getting a bit philosophical right now, but there's this kind of thing, this pervasive idea that, you know, it's all sacrosanct and that it can't be changed, but it's changed over and over and over. Our whole kind of modern bibliometric approach is a result of librarians, which is my discipline, post World War II, going, we need to figure out a way to connect all these pieces together, and that's where bibliometric studies come from. That's pretty new still. Sorry, I'm ranting now. Thank you for your contributions. Really appreciate it. If there's any other questions, we'll have a couple more minutes at the end. I just want to end talking about impact culture, and it actually relates directly to your comment, Alicia, that it is both top down and bottom up. So there's certainly some top down kind of expectations that are evolving in various areas geographically, as well as within the university, around how to do impact. What does that look like? But there's also this bottom-up kind of approach that's happening. People going, this is a great opportunity for me to really make an impact, to really change the community, to really have my research adopted and used. One of my research participants said, I don't want to have the thesis that only 3 people read. I actually want my work to be used and be useful. And so hopefully this is an opportunity. And because it is early days, there's still opportunity to help shape what that looks like. So shaping the conversation around what kind of granting is required, what kind of development is required, what kind of supports are required, and how do we embed impact in useful ways in terms of policy. I thought we would end with this question, because this was the question at the very start on the first slide that Ellie put into the subtitle of the talk today, was how do you want your research to be used? And I thought that would be a nice way to end. Some of the responses are the flip of what you've put in about the problem. So I'll spend a couple minutes being quiet, and I'd love to hear in the chat, how do you want your research to be used? You could think of it as well as, what do you want your legacy to be? Or what is SMI and SUD?
I'll jump in with that. It's substance misuse and substance use disorders.
Okay, thank you very much. Tora is writing very quickly, it looks like. Severe mental illness and substance use disorders, great. Small lesson there around interdisciplinary knowledge, simplifying, defining terms. We'll wait a couple more seconds, see if anybody else is contributing. Not sure where everyone is on this. Maybe it's too big of a question. I like that, Elizabeth. Thank you. For my ideas to be used by consumers to help to be active decision makers about their medications. So definitely a user or a patient engagement process through that. To make academic environments more supportive of learners' diverse needs. That's great. Emily, my friend Jackie Tinkler is an education researcher who's thinking about that as well. So maybe write her name down and you should touch base. She's always looking for collaborators.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, it doesn't seem like many more people are contributing. That's okay. Hopefully this session was useful for you. We've got just a few more minutes at the end here. If anybody else has additional questions, feel free to stay around and ask those questions. I want to just wish you the very best on your research journeys, your impact journeys. We are around. There's support to help with impact from the DVCR portfolio, such as today's session, and happy to continue the conversation with the various units that are represented in this presentation today. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Wade.
Thanks, Wade.
Thank you.
Just to let everyone know that the session has been recorded and we will be putting that on the MARC web pages, and we'll send you all a link so you can get the slides and all of the information.
Thank you.